In July of 1969, something happened that many people once believed was impossible. For the first time in human history, human beings landed on the moon. The mission responsible for this historic moment was known as Apollo 11. When the lunar module touched the surface of the moon, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped down the ladder and spoke words that would echo across history. "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Millions of people around the world watched the event live on television. It was not only a scientific achievement, it was also a political milestone, a technological triumph, and a moment that symbolized humanity's ability to explore beyond Earth. But the story of the moon landing did not begin in 1969. It began many years earlier. To understand why the United States sent astronauts to the moon, we must first understand the global rivalry that defined the mid-20th century. The world after World War II. After World War II ended, the international balance of power changed dramatically. Two nations emerged as the dominant global superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. These two countries had very different political and economic systems. The United States promoted democratic governance and capitalism. The Soviet Union was a communist state governed by a single political party. Although they had been allies during the war, tensions between them grew rapidly. This geopolitical competition became known as the Cold War. Unlike previous wars, the Cold War was not fought primarily through direct military conflict between the two powers. Instead, it involved political influence, technological competition, military alliances, and ideological rivalry. One of the most important arenas for this competition would soon become outer space, the beginning of the space race. In the 1950s, advances in rocket technology made it possible for humans to send objects into space. Both the United States and the Soviet Union were developing powerful rockets. These rockets had originally been designed for military purposes. Intercontinental ballistic missiles could deliver nuclear weapons across continents. But the same technology could also launch satellites into orbit. In 1957, the Soviet Union achieved a stunning scientific and political victory. They launched the first artificial satellite into space. The satellite was called Sputnik 1. When Sputnik began orbiting the Earth, it shocked many people in the United States. The satellite itself was small, roughly the size of a beach ball. But its significance was enormous. If the Soviet Union could launch a satellite into orbit, it meant they possessed rockets powerful enough to reach anywhere on Earth. The event triggered fear, surprise, and urgency within the United States government. American leaders realized that space technology had become an important symbol of national power. The competition that followed became known as the space race, the creation of NASA. In response to the launch of Sputnik, the United States decided to reorganize its space efforts. In 1958, the government created a new civilian space agency. This agency was called the NASA. NASA's mission was to coordinate scientific research and technological development related to space exploration. It would oversee the design of rockets, spacecraft, satellites, and eventually missions involving human astronauts. The early years of NASA were challenging. The Soviet Union continued to achieve major milestones. In 1961, a Soviet astronaut named Yuri Gagarin became the first human to travel into outer space. His spacecraft completed one orbit around Earth before returning safely. The achievement made headlines across the world. For the United States, it was another reminder that the Soviet space program was moving quickly. American leaders began asking a crucial question: what goal could the United States pursue that would clearly demonstrate technological leadership? A bold goal. In May of 1961, the President of the United States addressed the nation with an ambitious proposal. The President was John F. Kennedy. In a speech to the United States Congress, Kennedy announced a bold objective. The United States would commit itself to landing a human being on the moon and returning them safely to Earth. And it would accomplish this before the end of the decade. At the time, this goal seemed extraordinarily ambitious. Human spaceflight was still in its early stages. Only a few astronauts had traveled into orbit. The moon was nearly 384,000 kilometers away from Earth. Reaching it would require rockets far more powerful than any that had yet been used. Spacecraft would need to carry astronauts through deep space, land on another celestial body, and then return home. Despite these challenges, the United States government committed enormous resources to the effort. The program responsible for achieving this goal became known as the Apollo program. Building the technology, achieving Kennedy's goal required one of the largest technological projects in human history. Hundreds of thousands of engineers, scientists, and technicians contributed to the Apollo program. New technologies had to be invented. Computers needed to become smaller and more reliable. Navigation systems had to guide spacecraft across vast distances. Life support systems needed to keep astronauts alive in the vacuum of space. Perhaps the most important technological development was the rocket that would carry astronauts beyond Earth. This rocket was known as the Saturn V. The Saturn V remains one of the most powerful rockets ever built. Standing over 110 meters tall, it was roughly the height of a 36-story building. At launch, its engines produced more than 7 million pounds of thrust. This enormous power was necessary to escape Earth's gravity and send astronauts toward the moon. Testing in tragedy. Before astronauts could attempt a lunar landing, NASA needed to test spacecraft and procedures. Early missions focused on Earth orbit. Astronauts practiced rendezvous maneuvers, docking spacecraft together in space. They tested life support systems and navigation equipment. However, the Apollo program also experienced tragedy. In 1967, during a ground test, a fire broke out inside the spacecraft of Apollo 1. 3 astronauts were inside the capsule: Gus Grissom, Ed White, Roger B. Chaffee. The fire spread rapidly within the oxygen-rich environment of the spacecraft. All 3 astronauts died. The accident shocked NASA and the nation. Investigations revealed design flaws and safety problems. NASA halted the Apollo program temporarily and redesigned the spacecraft. Although the tragedy delayed the mission, it also led to important improvements in spacecraft safety. Moving toward the moon by 1968, NASA had regained momentum. New missions began testing lunar flight capabilities. One of the most important was Apollo 8. In December 1968, Apollo 8 carried astronauts around the moon for the first time in history. They did not land, but they orbited the moon and returned safely to Earth. During the mission, astronauts photographed the Earth rising above the lunar horizon. The image became famous and changed how many people viewed our planet. It showed Earth as a small, fragile sphere floating in the darkness of space. Apollo 8 proved that a lunar mission was possible. The final step would be a landing. That mission would become Apollo 11. The crew of Apollo 11, the crew selected for the historic mission, included 3 astronauts. The commander was Neil Armstrong. He was an experienced pilot and former test pilot. The lunar module pilot was Buzz Aldrin. He was responsible for helping operate the spacecraft that would land on the moon. The command module pilot was Michael Collins. Collins would remain in orbit around the moon while Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the surface. Together, these three astronauts would attempt something no human had ever done before. They would attempt to land on the moon. Preparing for history by the summer of 1969, the world was ready for the most ambitious space mission ever attempted. Engineers had built the most powerful rocket in history. Astronauts had trained for years. The technology had been tested repeatedly. Millions of people waited to see whether the mission would succeed. On July 16, 1969, at a launch site in Florida, the massive Saturn V rocket stood ready. Inside the spacecraft sat three astronauts. Their destination was nearly 384,000 kilometers away, and the entire world was watching.